welcome everyone to a conversation on the female future of design. Thanks to Melbourne Fringe for inviting me to take part in this discussion. I'm Sandra Tan, freelance writer and conversational curator. Now, firstly, I acknowledge that though we're not physically gathered, from my house, I share my ideas on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people. And all of us collectively pay our respects to the diverse traditional owners of the lands that we live on, to their elders, past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. Now, from here, we would like to acknowledge the lack of an Indigenous creative voice in this panel. In our prep for this recorded chat, it was made clear that we missed the opportunity to involve someone to speak to that legacy here, that very rich cultural legacy here, and heritage of design. And I want to take this moment on behalf of the program to affirm our position that a female future for design in this country must include its first people. Now, with that said, we have some fascinating women on this panel and I can't wait to get stuck into this conversation. Now, I'd like to ask each of you to introduce yourselves, tell us a bit about who you are and share a little about what you do.
I'll start.
Maybe, yeah, if you can start.
I'm Sarah Kay. I'm a designer and curator and now an educator in the design and sustainability space. I have been started a project called Supercycles a decade ago to really concentrate on sustainability and design, and it hasn't gone away, that issue. It's grown, as we all know. That's becoming really one of the pressing issues of our time. And I've kind of become a bit of a design activist more recently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Nicole?
Thanks, Sandra. I'd also like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people and the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on today. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and emerging, and really take this opportunity to celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing connection and cultures to the lands and waters of Victoria. And yeah, I think that point, Sandra, about us needing to show solidarity is a kind of missed opportunity today. But I think that this is an issue that the XYX Lab, I'm from Monash University and a director of the XYX Lab, we're really thinking more intersectionally about the work that we do, which has predominantly been around gender and inclusive cities. So our work is about thinking about the ways that we can advocate for gender and place, and particularly women and girls and gender diverse people. So we're kind of working in the space of architecture and landscape architecture with designers to really think about how we can make people aware of gender and inclusive cities in the work that we do.
It's a fascinating line of research that I really want to unpack a little bit further in this chat. So Kristen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello everyone, my name is Kristen. I'm the founder of Kristen Wang Design, which also focused on the intention of sustainability and also biodegradability in functional art or design. And I'm also a senior tutor in the University of Melbourne School of Design in the Architecture Master Design Studio, while I'm also working in Cox Architect. And yeah, so I have quite a few roles, but been focusing on the topic of female and sustainable design for a long time.
Yeah. Okay, now I want to hop back to Sarah.
Do that. Sorry, I'm just on Gandhi land here, and I wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really interesting, time that we're all living in, that we do have to connect online, and we are, not physically in one place at the same time. So I think, acknowledgement of country in a Zoom era is a little bit more involved, and I'm really thankful that everyone here has embraced that. So, all right, Sarah, curious. Now you wear many hats. Of all the many projects that you have either founded or you're currently involved in, if we're talking about a female future, which for design, which of those hats gives you the most opportunity to advance a female future in design?
I mean, that's a little bit like asking me to choose which is my favorite child, in a way, because I think in a sense that just happens for me by virtue of being female. All my projects are female led. But it was, I think we were talking about this, that it wasn't until I sat down and wrote the masterclass that I've just written in sustainability and design that I realized that what I'd evolved, I think, is actually a female led design kind of process. And it was through breaking down the problem solving that our current paradigm, and which it isn't until you sit down and really look at that, but everything that we've learnt and the way we behave, it does operate under a patriarchy and capitalism. So once you start analysing that and realising what you're doing differently, it gives you that ability to see that perhaps it is actually more feminine to do things. And I'll give you an example. The most fundamental one is problem solving, I believe, is the act of coming up with a solution. And the way that we've been taught to do that is to answer the brief and solve the problem at hand. And we've never been taught to really look into the future and think about what the ramifications of that solution are going to be, which is, I think, where we differ. I feel like that's what I intrinsically do. I think about a much bigger, a wider picture. And I think that I can't be certain, but I feel like that might be something that we can promote as a sort of a female or gender specific way of kind of operating. And I think that also kind of tied up with that is the idea that we design from within, which I reacted against when I first, when I did a unit or a design studio in feminism, and we were told women design from within and men design from without. And I thought that was very reductive, and I wanted to, things to be beautiful too. I definitely wanted to be involved with how things look on the outside just as much as from the inside. But the more I've gone through my career, the more I realized that is actually the way I design. I do think about the internal, and it's not necessarily a physical thing like inside and outside. It's that you think from inside and you kind of come up with all your solutions that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the environmental approach to design, that kind of approaching things from the perspective that there is a life cycle involved in every expression and in every product that we produce. That's something that I think speaks, in different ways to the many things that each of the three of you are involved in creatively and in a work capacity. As far as, Kristen's work, you're coming from an architectural world. So you have both the lens of that on an urban scale, but then also moving into the design work that you do. So maybe we can unpack how, that environmental aspect comes into your work.
Yeah, so actually I'm really resigned with echoing with Sarah's point of design with being. And one of the design still, when as a student designing for a small project, is also starting actually thinking about from the kitchen, like where as a female, the role in family, although it's not definitely tradition, but the more time we involve in the house, in the kitchen, and how that as a starting point to really unpack the whole house and project would be a really interesting way to think about what female in the future and the role in both domesticity and also architectural role. And just back into my practice in a different scale is my practice is more focusing on furniture design, and the main focus has been laid on the sustainability and also the biodegradability of the product. So from the daily life, as also kind of, not sure, it's also because we as women, we're more sensitive to our daily life, daily environment, that have really been catching my eyes how everyday people in the cafe or at home, like I used to did, we just throw out all the coffee ground waste into the viewland. And that really inspired me to create a product that use this kind of waste material no one ever think about. And also because such an organic material, how in the end it can back to the nature to biodegrade itself, to become part of the land as well. So my project, the main project, is called Ribbon Coffee Stew. So it's made of this biodegradable binding together with this coffee ground waste. And the main focus is not only to create a piece that is made of this material that it can biodegrade, but also is actually functional, that people can really use it in daily life. They can sit on it, they can use it, they can touch it, rather than sometimes when like this, they create a piece of work, they have this provocative voice, but then is at the other hand have to compromise on the function, or on the other hand have to compromise the aesthetics. So I would aiming to do that at the same time. And then Sally, luckily, I'm really lucky to get involved and get represented by Sally's gallery. So that has been keep pushing me to keep thinking about this approach and how, from a design perspective and also from an art perspective, that how different from traditional sense of art that you always put it at the most beautiful corner of the house, but you only look at it, rather than it become a part of your life, whether you use it as a table, you touch it, you put things on top, or you use a stool or chair, you sit on it as your daily life. So how this can become a kind of functional art compared to the other sense of, like, traditional sense of art or pure design.
Yeah. I think that concept is really something that speaks to a need for tactility and the experiential. It's something that I would associate with the need for humans to connect with the things that we have in our environment and the things that we create for ourselves to support our lives, which I think, zooming out further from the stool, then from architecture, Kristen, and then, zooming out even further into the urban scale, Nicole, where do you see those ideas of gender coming into play in the urban landscape? Because I don't think it's something that in the mainstream we necessarily spend a lot of time thinking about or discussing.
It's so interesting just listening to Sarah and Kristen speak. Sarah's kind of positioning around the kind of reflective practice and that kind of relationship to the feminine or female or women, and Kristen's kind of focus on the material. And I guess that part of what the XYX Lab is interested in, as you say, in this kind of urban scale, is really how we can develop a gender sensitive awareness in our lives in cities. And for us, that really kind of comes through in things like policy and the processes that we undertake to make decisions that affect all of us. So a lot of the work that we're doing is about how we define these common principles. So for me, the way that I identify, while it impacts my work, I'm really interested in uncovering other experiences of gender in cities to ensure that the kinds of spaces and places we make reflect all of our kind of needs and wants and desires. So for me, the method is much more about how we facilitate those voices and experiences coming out in design processes. And we do that through a lot of co-design, where we're engaging people that are from lots of different diverse backgrounds to really see themselves as part of the design process and to participate in identifying challenges in cities and to help us co-create solutions. So that is the way that it kind of emerges in the practices that we do here at the XYX Lab at Monash.
Okay. And whereabouts, as just super curious, like whereabouts do you, where are people getting that right? Is anyone getting that right on an urban scale? Where do you look to refer to, these ideas?
Yeah, one of the projects that I'm kind of working on at the moment is building a platform so that we can really see what community-led and community-focused projects look like, because I think they are a kind of alternative practice. The one case study that we often come back to, which lots of architects would be aware of, is the work undertaken in Vienna, where there has been very much a gender mainstreaming process underway for over 25 years, where we can really see the efficacy, the evidence-based research of the impact of what it means if we think about gender-sensitive design. So there are certainly smaller projects, and I think there's an increasing awareness with practitioners around how we must engage for gender and diversity more broadly. But I think that we're slowly starting to see those issues take hold, and for people to become much more attuned to the kinds of thinking that needs to happen, research that needs to happen, so that we can design inclusive cities and spaces.
Absolutely. Sarah, so in your line of work, and I say line like it's one line, but there's many strands that you seem to be a part of. I'm curious, how does gender diversity and that sensitivity that we all need to have going forward as people that create things for future, how does that impact on your practice and on the things that you actually design, the objects that you've created?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel very like I just do it my own way. I don't think I've ever stopped and thought about whether I'm doing something in a gender specific way, unless I'm actually confronted with, and actually probably when I'm working as an architect or interior designer is when I'll come up against that most strongly, when I'm working with a team of men and I'm not treated as though what I'm doing is necessarily I'm not respected in the way that maybe I might be if I was a man. That's really, other than that, I've never felt held back by any of the work that I do, and I'm not sure that I'm really focusing on that in the way it's not driving my work. It's definitely, but like I said earlier, yes, it's definitely a part of it, of course, naturally. But I don't feel like I think I'd be lying if I pretended that I was actually trying to achieve that. I mean, I more and more, I feel like I want to see women taking the lead. That's just how I feel at the moment. I feel like we've had a good go at it with men doing it, and there's some problems with it. So, and
yep.
So, yeah, it's changing for me, and maybe I will be putting it into, imbuing it more concertedly into my work, but I feel like it's there anyway. So what do you think about that, Nikki? I'm interested to hear what you...
About which part, Sarah?
Well, just not going into it with a really strong agenda, feminist agenda, but just by virtue of doing it, being, approaching those issues.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you're in a position of privilege, I imagine you are, where that aspect of gender isn't kind of strong for you, that you're a celebrated, successful designer, and so, you potentially confront those struggles, as you say, when you're in a room full of men that maybe aren't treating you the same way that they might treat each other. But certainly, the experiences and the research that we're doing with women who are just, moving through cities every day, not designers, but living in the worlds that we design for them, their experiences are pretty crap. And, they are being, the work that we do around public transport, women are being sexually harassed all the time. And
I'm not saying that stuff doesn't happen. I'm just saying in terms of the work that I do.
Yeah. I mean, all I'm saying is that I think you probably don't have to confront it as much because of your position potentially. But yeah. I
mean, if I can share a little bit of my thoughts on just that point, there's been times in my career my background is in design, and architecture media. So I'm not myself a designer, I'm not an architect. And I think that I've had to work to really legitimize my voice in this space quite a lot more than I probably would have observed a gentleman having to work to legitimize their voice in this space. I think something that potentially affects women disproportionately to men is that imposter syndrome. And I certainly took me a while to position myself as someone with a valid and also valuable perspective on the stories that get told in design and architecture in this country. And I will also say that, you know, I've observed in my experience that it's quite often in publishing that women seem to be given these roles and responsibilities to tell these stories in a really sensitive way. We're given a lot of the, what would I call it, the mental load of having to be sensitive around storytelling and tell things in a faithful way and jump into be essentially empathetic. And those soft skills are something that I would think has been ascribed to me as a woman in the media. And, you know, I like to think that it enables me to help moderate conversations like this, be a part of conversations like this and give value, even though, again, I'm not myself an architect, nor am I a designer. But just as someone who has, you know, had to spend a lot of my professional life jumping in and out of these stories and looking at these projects and trying to understand them from a bird's eye view. So that's where I come into it, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know. I enjoy the fact that we are able to have an exchange here and that it's not so much me kind of, you know, ascribing you questions, that you guys can jump in and have this conversation. But I would like to hear a little bit more from Kristen at this point. In terms of, you know, the things that actually started you on this journey of architecture, of design, because I think, you know, you and I had a discussion about it's not always a given that in, you know, we both have Asian descent. And I think it's not always a given for people from Asian cultures to pursue creative fields and to expect success in these fields. So yeah, I'm just curious to see, you know, how you got into it and what your journey was at the beginning.
Actually, yeah, thanks, Sarah. It actually like really raised a good question because I'm not an Australian. It's my going 4th year in Melbourne in Australia. And coming from a different background, I studied my bachelor in the UK, but when I was childhood in Asia, I definitely experienced the appreciation towards creative discipline like art, design is definitely less compared to even like country in like Asia, such as Japan or Australia, UK or other places. So I don't know, I just been fascinated by the nature of environment since a kid, and then it always been my passion to become an architect, and I started into this journey. And I think architecture is such a great lens because it comprises such like different topic, different area. You can come from an urban scale, environmental scale, like technical construction scale, or even down to the interior furniture scale, and also complies the like history, the future. Like there's so many exciting things happening in this realm of architecture, and this creativity within that is really leaving us to think about like different topics, like Sarah, your practice, and Nicole, your XYX Lab. So, and I mean, that definitely speak about like because of the different culture, and then the being an Australia as in Australia, I just feel there's still kind of culture differences to being fully accept it. So, I mean, in earlier conversation, we discussed like you, Sarah, you born in Australia. Well, there also a third group that, like, for example, like designer like me, coming from a like foreign country and then settling in Australia. I mean, being in meanwhile, Australia is really accepting country. Like, there's so many migrants, so many different culture groups, ethics in the country and this city. But to fully really go into each local communities, I still feel the barriers still exist, and also like in practice in the company, it still feels the gaps, that kind of invisible gaps that separate into different people. And also that puts a further difficulty being a female in this situation. Well, men, they probably more, I'm like speculating, but from my observation, like men will be more kind of work orientated, where for female, they always have an extra layer of like expectation, you being like more considering, sensitive, look around, that kind of feeling.
Yeah, and it's that expectation too that I think is where I was sort of calling that the soft skills, that we're all expected to accommodate this extra level of complexity and this extra level of sensitivity when we're dealing with people in the workplace. Whereas I feel as though, from my observation, the men that I've worked with seem fairly unbothered and unburdened by that that kind of that to the same degree. So I'm interested to hear from you, Sarah. Speaking about being in that space where you do have to advocate, and you are an activist. What does that actually look like in your day-to-day? And I know that everything, I guess, that you're involved in is to some degree by virtue of it being driven by you. It is an act of an act of change, or an act that's trying to improve the conditions for women. But just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm really sorry, I don't understand the question. What do you mean?
Essentially, what does activism look like to you, and how does that impact on the work that you do? Where do you see in your practice there being that element of activism?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of a strong word to use, and and in some respects it's almost a little tongue-in-cheek. But it's come from feeling as though the most pressing concerns of our time are, environmental concerns, and the fact that the material world that we're involved in when we design something is responsible for that, the detriment that and to some extent other things like eating and nourishment and all those things, but the fact that we have got into a situation of consumption to the degree that we haven't considered the impact on the environment as a really integral part of the design process is kind of crazy. And it's really interesting also that it doesn't belong anywhere but in our Western capitalist world. In most indigenous cultures and societies, or the land and the importance of throwing the land out of balance once you do something to it and alter it is of the utmost importance. And I think that's what we've really got to move back to. And so it's very present. It's become, the impetus of me just simply making a living or doing the things that I do. I don't particularly make an amazing living. It's just is driven now by these really pressing concerns. That's what's driven the activist part of it, I guess. Yeah,
absolutely. I think, look, speaking as someone who I'm a freelance writer for the most part, so I have had to also, and we've touched on this before too, operate outside what the normal capitalist structure is. Yeah, it's something that weighs on my mind a lot. Like, is it actually possible for us to exist outside of that structure and also succeed? Or is it that we have to create these new structures in order to succeed? I guess that's a question for everyone, or it's a hypothetical question that I've just thrown to the group.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'll give it to someone else. But I definitely have thoughts about that.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
curious to hear what you think.
I feel like we're in a transition, and that question is so valid. It's pretty much sums up our state of play. We're in it, and we can see ways around it, so we can function. And everything I'm doing with changing the landscape is still within the landscape, and it's working within that system, and it's still about consumption. And we're talking about getting to a place where we consume in a much more circular fashion, with, you know, essentially the word sustainable encapsulates it. If we can get it so that we're living in a world where we have an economy that relies on sustainability, we can potentially make it work. But we don't know for sure that. We don't know that that is actually the case. We may go through this whole thing and get ourselves into a more sustainable place with regard to the planet, and it may not suit capitalism and our systems that we currently inhabit. We may have to alter them further, you know. And I know I've been feeling, I've gone right through the whole thing because it's been a long period of time thinking these things through, and I was about to lose hope entirely, and then I came across the degrowth movement. Do you guys know about that?
I haven't heard, no.
It started in France. It's really interesting, but it really is like COVID has given us a little lesson into what it's about. It's the idea that, you know, if we take the position that everything about the way our world is constructed is giving the growth chart, you know, the paramount kind of importance. And we don't, it's kind of unprecedented in nature. And really, when you stop and question that, it's like, why do we do that? Why is it so important to make more and faster? And once you start questioning that, you can sort of think, well, if we didn't produce so much and make so much, we wouldn't actually consume so much. And then we'd actually have more time to do other things, like appreciate the things we already have. And that whole does actually have a system, an economic system attached to it. But I found that really appealing.
Yeah, no, I want to touch on that in a sec, because there's an interesting point that I want to go further with. But I am interested to hear from you, Nicole. What do you think? Do we need to make new systems in order to succeed and thrive in a future of design for women?
Look, I think we do, and I think one of the things that can happen is we can get a bit bogged down in the negative aspects of what's happening in cities, and I think that it's important to acknowledge those things. But there are some optimistic things that are occurring. So the Gender Equality Act is kind of taking place in Victoria at the moment, and that's really going to start to make people accountable, organisations, governments, universities accountable for thinking about gender. And in a way, you know, I'm thinking about your comment, Sandra, that some of the men that you are working alongside aren't kind of thinking a lot about these issues that we're talking about here today. And I do think we need a few sticks to really make sure that we start to think about them. I'm certainly not an expert on sustainability, but I do know that some of those targets and the ways that we've been kind of forced to measure those in architecture, for example, they do promote accountability, and they promote research and conversations, and they hopefully deliver change. And I think that gender has to become part of that similar conversation. It's happening in Europe, where there are particular kinds of targets that are required when you're undertaking urban design work, etc. And I think that we need to see those kinds of structural changes happening here in Australia as well. We need to know that we have to be accountable to those issues. So yeah, I think we do need kind of radical change, and hopefully the work that organisations like Parla and XYX Lab and international organisations that are working in gender particularly and intersectionality are really starting to kind of help us understand what those changes are.
And Nicole, following your contribution, I was wondering, in this current situation and the impact of COVID, like definitely female has been more impacted compared to men, and they are more like female are more in kind of casual based employment compared to like ongoing position. I mean, I myself still in casual, and I have a colleague has been working in the university for a really, really long time, but because of being a female, I mean, it's kind of sad story to say, she has been in the casual position for really, really, really long time. So I was wondering on your research, in the COVID impact situation, what would you like suggest, or what's your thought on female employment? And
So I guess there's a couple of aspects to your question. My colleague and I, Jill Matthewson, we wrote a piece about the pandemic quite early on in the first wave, and we were talking about the way that it's kind of really going to start to create a wider gap in terms of gender inequity and inequality. And so I think to your point, yeah, the kind of casualisation of the workforce and all of those things is just really in stark relief at the moment, the ways that inequity has kind of become so apparent to us and how it's really dire. The work that the XYX Lab isn't so much concerned with what's happening within organisations and the workforce. We're very interested in thinking about how the work that we do as stakeholders, if you like, of the urban environment impacts people in cities. So certainly when we have inequity in the workforce, when we don't have great female and gender diverse representation in workforces, then exactly what Sandra's saying, people aren't thinking about these issues because apparently they don't have to if they have particular ideas around what cities might be like. So I think that the more women and gender diverse people we have in these organisations, the more likely we are to see the consideration for diverse voices when they're thinking about how to make spaces and how to make cities and places. So the impact is enormous. We cannot underestimate the impact of that inequity, not just on the profession, but on all of us. And the same could be said for the kinds of things that you were talking about, Kristen, where, you know, the marginalisation is even greater if you're of a particular ethnicity and you're also a woman, or all of those things, they just become more and more complex. So part of our role is to both understand how the workforce impacts the result in the real world, but also to think about how we can make structural changes that can impact both. And then, of course, we've got to measure that impact and make sure that there's efficacy associated with it. So it's incredibly complex and it's a bloody big task.
So I'm glad we've got, you know, all these people on it. We've got XYX Lab on it. Yeah. Sarah, to you, you know, following on from that point about COVID and how COVID has impacted across every industry, you know, we were talking about fashion and feeling a little bit disheartened by the sustainability policies in place or the processes in place in fashion. I don't know about you guys, I've been wearing like the same 5 sets of activewear this entire lockdown. So I feel as though it would be impossible for it to not have a gigantic impact on fashion. Are those the conversations that you're having with the people in that realm?
I'm actually not involved with a lot of people in fashion, but it's definitely been my observation. And I can see that just having, so I'm actually doing a project at the moment in fashion. It's a sustainable fashion initiative. So I've done a bit of a deep dive into the whole thing, and I can see that the industry is desperately wanting to change, but it's so grounded in the most consumptive behavior that we've got. It's just, it's out of control. And the more closely I looked at it, the worse it was. I was actually completely astounded that we've let it get to this point. But that doesn't mean that that means we can make the greatest change too. So We have to look on the bright side. But I think what's happening is that we're getting a lot of desire in the way that we're talking about what we want to see, and it's not yet followed through. We have a really big problem with having relegated our wastes to China for a long time, and that I didn't even really understand fully what that meant until I went into the textile waste space. And essentially we've been sending it to China, and they've been coming up with all kinds of innovations in that area while we just did nothing. And now we're in a position where we have no manufacture here, and we can't deal with waste, our own waste. So we're really in quite, dire straits, but at the same time, it's an opportunity, and we've got to get going. We've got to start actually doing something about that. But we're in a discrepancy at the moment where anybody who's honestly thinks that we're doing anything sustainable in the fashion world is delusional, because we don't recycle anything in this country. Nothing.
Yeah, I totally agree with your point there.
Yeah.
I mean, in addition to like in fashion industry, like my whole initiative of my recycle coffee bin project is exactly the same. Whereas like coffee industry is so gigantic in worldwide, or like in Melbourne is famous for coffee, but behind this whole industry, anyone have thought about the waste issue happening behind the scene, where all those thousands of tons of coffee ground waste go? So, I mean, my piece, not only as a functional stew, but also as a kind of artist who want to say my voice to raise this question to people. Where does this waste go? Not only in coffee industry,
but you're making
like,
a really important point, which is that you can do something quite small, and what you're doing is you're raising an awareness by the act of doing that thing, which is very much, we're on the same page. We're both doing that. And that's so important at this stage, just for people to understand that there's so much waste. Yeah.
I'm curious. I mean, I think this next question probably speaks, I would guess, more directly to the fashion industry, but open to across the board, across design industries. Considering that a lot of the fashion waste that would happen, is part of a whole ecosystem of, the way that women are marketed to, the way that the kind of dream that we're sold of, this is the fall collection and this is the summer collection, and now everything that you owned 6 months ago is disgusting and we can't look at it ever again. How much of the change that we need to see in these spaces, is it contingent on women becoming empowered? Is that actually what we're saying here? Is that really the crucial point that we're making?
I mean, I'm sorry to monopolize. I'll just quickly answer, because I have been thinking about this a lot. One of the things that when I'm consulting, I have lots of girls coming to me with ideas about what they could, potentially, something they thought of that could help make the change. And that's been really consistent over the last 3-4 years, or 3 years at least. So I can tell just from that the girls are feeling it. I really feel like women and girls are feeling this, that they can tell there's a problem and they want to fix it in some way. So I feel like, when it happens, as long as we're driving that change, it's going to be embraced really readily. You have to understand that consumerism was, it's just so deeply rooted in everything about the way we live, and it's such a fundamental part of everything, the way we think and all our actions. I mean, we're basically trying to fill the hole at the center of ourselves, because that's how we've been told you can do it, and it's a great big lie. But until we actually get a grip on that, which I think that's going to happen. Like, you also, the thing about COVID having put us at a distance from so much of our normal life, I think we've all learnt a little that we're not quite so dependent on the myriad of things that we thought we were. You know, we don't actually need nearly as much as what we thought. And ironically, I think online sales generally are up, but I do also feel like we've all pared back in what we consume quite a lot.
Yeah, it's a fascinating point. I think that, you know, maybe hopefully what COVID's done is kind of reflect a mirror to what wasn't working in the capitalist structures that we had all just come to accept and live by and you know, take for granted. You know, hopefully it's crumbling. I can feel it. I can feel it slowly crumbling.
I think COVID helped with that, but it was kind of, it's been definitely bubbling to the surface. It feels good to be
absolutely. I think you know, as far as for myself, look, I know that growing up, I had very few women of color in the industry that I could look up to in the media, you know, and now being someone that I would consider myself not, I don't know if I'd consider myself, you know, mid-career or what. I've been doing what I'm doing for say 7-8 years. And, you know, last year, at Den Fair, I got the opportunity to actually open the door for someone who was a Filipino young creative person without thinking about it. Like that wasn't like a goal that I had knowingly. But in the moment when I'm sort of seeing this younger person come up through the ranks, take on more responsibility, you know, be hands-on, like looked at her looking at the design community that has felt to me like at the very beginning felt like quite a closed, privileged world that I'd had no place in. You know, seeing her there and knowing that I'd had a hand in placing her there was quite, you know, it was quite gratifying. And I think that hopefully when we talk about the systems that we're used to and we talk about capitalism and we talk about needing to diversify and making spaces more representative, I'm hoping that that's the change, that's the track that we're seeing. And I think it is. I have hope that it is. What are your thoughts on that, Nicole?
Yeah, I think that I've had quite a big shift with the way that I'm thinking about what the future of the XYX Lab looks like. So it's so interesting to think that, you know, 3 or 4 years ago when Jean Borden and I founded the XYX Lab, we were really focused on this kind of nexus of gender and place. And very quickly that has had to expand and our learning has had to expand to really think very more strategically about the intersectionalities of gender, you know, that it's not just about women and girls and cities, it's got to be much broader than that. And so for us, and thinking about your kind of moment of mentoring or kind of opening a door for somebody, we have had to work really hard to think about diversity within our team. So I think there's now 12 of us now and our PhD students, and it doesn't just arrive. You have to think about how you're strategically going to build diverse teams and ensure that you are following through on the kinds of values that we have. And I think that that does require ongoing learning and ongoing questioning and reframing and thinking exactly what you're saying. How do I open the door? How do I ensure that there's a pipeline for younger researchers? How do I get out of the way? You know, how do I actually get out of the way? And, you know, we, Sarah and Sandra, you and I the other night had a conversation about that. We were challenged by the by aspects of what we were kind of trying to do on this panel, and it is really, really difficult, and we can't just kind of ignore those questions. And I think I've thought for a long time that we kind of had to get it right and it had to be perfect, but actually part of it is knowing when things are not right and working out how you're going to fix them, taking on board feedback and all of those kinds of challenging things.
Yeah, I think it's important to you know, sit with the discomfort of it, because it should feel uncomfortable that we are dismantling an entire system bit by bit. Like it's by definition going to feel weird, you know? So I think the fact that we've been able to recognize it, adapt in a way that I think, you know, was was quite I don't know, to me it was quite a learning moment, even for myself, because I don't stand here as some kind of one woman representative of diversity. So it's obviously not what it is. You know, I will say on the urban design conversation, and in making urban environments more inclusive, and all the work that very important work that you're doing, I admire it for the fact that very early on in my career as a young, plucky young architecture and interior design editor, I remember being sort of accosted at an event by a very important urban architect, very senior urban architect, who you know, spent the next sort of 10-15 minutes in a monologue about how he just successfully, you know, activated this community on the urban fringe, and it was, you know, engaging all the stakeholders, and, you know, introducing culture and introducing all of these, you know, exciting new things. Totally not realizing that he was actually describing where I grew up. The you know, the very fringe, very you know, not designed urban environment where I grew up, and the people that he was describing as people that they were bringing culture to or engaging. Effectively, he was describing my family. So to me, that was a huge marker early on in my career that actually, it's almost as though I wasn't expected to get a leg into this room, you know, and so being part and being, you know, involved in conversations, and now with the role that I have in being able to share these conversations, I think it's something that I've always kind of been conscious about. Like, there is a discrepancy here in this country in the way that we talk about design. And we are all sort of tasked with addressing it because we work in these fields. We're lucky to work in these fields, and we have the access that we do.
There's a girl in America, in the US, Pascal Sablin, who's an architect, and she's putting together a really comprehensive, she's just done like an open call to the whole of the US, and it's actually going international. But she's African American, and is wanting to create a specifically diverse, what do you call it, a database of designers. And I think it'd be really worthwhile doing that in this country. You know,
yeah.
But you could do it with me, Sandra.
Yeah, I mean, we probably need as many people on it as possible. You know, it's the more I look into it and the more I understand how these issues work within my practice, my writing and the way that I tell stories, the more I know how much I don't know, effectively, you know. And I think it's exciting. It's also a little uncomfortable, but I think if I keep operating at the, you know, intersection of exciting and uncomfortable, I'll get somewhere really cool. Now I'm just conscious of time. We're just on the hour now, so I might need to wrap things up in just a second, but I would like to you know, open the floor to everyone. If you'd like to have, you know, any closing statements that you might want to share, any advice that you might have for a woman or any female identifying people that want to join your industries, what would you say to those people?
I don't know why I answered that question that you asked me earlier about, you know, it not thinking about gender. I think about it all the time. I work in an industry as a furniture and product designer. We have, like, we're so underrepresented as women in that area. And I want to see more women doing that stuff. It is, I couldn't even say it's growing, it's not. We need to really do something about that, and we need to get young girls interested in it enough to want to be doing it. There you go, that's my closing.
Yep. And yourself, Kristen, as someone who's just, you know, I'm conscious that you've just quite entered yourself, so you're quite early in your career.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a quite interesting point about like getting more girls interested in this industrial. That in Asia, like some of like, for example, architecture is more kind of pre-considered, it's always a male industry, whereas in Western societies, there are actually more girls joining the industry, but at the same time, it's still far less. So it's quite important not only like letting the young girls interested in the creative work, but also how to encourage them to keep staying on, because after such a difficult degree, like for example architecture, and then into career, how we stay on is the most important advice I would like to give. For example, like this, like my project and my work experience, it's just like there's so many voices telling you not worth it, you can't make it. But I think I am the only few girls that, I mean, staying on. For example, my coffee project, there's so many voices say you're not going to work, but you're only able to know once you keep staying on, keep insist doing it, then you will see a better future or a success work, I would say. So yeah, it's also an advice to myself, because I'm such young in this industry. I would like to tell myself, stay on, and yeah, just don't give up.
Yeah. And yourself, Nicole?
Well, actually, Kristen stole my thunder with regard to this question really early on in our conversation, when, I don't know if you remember, but she was talking about just the education of an architect with this great fondness. And I have exactly the same feelings. Like the education of design is just such an extraordinary experience. You know, it's about people, it's about culture, it's about history, it's about behavior. It's about design. You know, I can't think of a more rewarding and rich kind of industry to enter into. But I do think we need to shift from thinking about design as a kind of form of expertise, or that the designer is this kind of sole creator, and we must move really deliberately towards thinking about design and the purpose of design, about solving real world problems, the kinds of things we've been talking about here this afternoon, and just to really kind of focus on design as a kind of form of facilitation. And I think that would be my kind of key message to someone who was thinking about coming into architecture or landscape architecture, urban design, etc.
I would 100% agree. The way that I come to design itself, the reason why I find it fascinating as a storyteller in this space is because I've seen, you know, my migrant family have to design solutions, and I mean physical, like toilet roll dispensers, dispensing all kinds of things in my grandpa's backyard, because he's just decided that that's what he needed it there for. You know, I think that being resourceful and problem solving, you know, design has so much capacity to tick these boxes on a large scale. And so, you know, I want to thank all of you for joining me in the conversation today, because we tackle that issue from so many different perspectives as women, but, you know, women, our genders aside, as people, as, you know, as professionals in what we do. So thanks to all of you. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Kristen. And thanks also to Melbourne Fringe and M Pavilion for giving us the platform to share this conversation today. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandra Tan. I'm a freelance writer and a conversational curator in Melbourne. And I would firstly like to acknowledge that though we're not physically gathered today, I share ideas on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people. We, Kristen and I, and M Pavilion and also Melbourne Fringe would like to pay our respects to the diverse traditional owners of the lands that we live on, to their elders, past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here with us today. So firstly, I suppose we're here to, as a little bit of a live debrief from the conversation that Kristen, you and I had with Nicole and with Sarah and yourself the other day, and it was quite a illuminating conversation for me, from my perspective. I think I came away from it learning a lot from all of you. We've got a few questions that have come in today from people that have watched, so thank you to everyone that did. And I guess I'll just run through the first one. So the first question here, and I guess, Kristen, it's a question for both of us, even though I'm the one reading them out. Would you be able to speak more to how you think gender impacts your creative process in design? So I'll probably let you take this one first, because I'm not a designer myself. And then I can follow on with how it impacts me in my work as a writer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kristen Wang, and it's my pleasure to be here to answer the Q&A session today. So it's actually a really, really good question. Before joining this talk, I never really particularly thought about this question. But I mean, I can't speak of all other females or female identity person. But from my kind of own perspective, I would be more sensitive to the questions that it poses through this design process. Like, for instance, my my design coffee stew made of coffee ground waste is kind of through my daily observation, daily kind of sensitivity towards what's happening in these little small things, that it kind of inspire me, and then further questioning what this waste happens to the community, the city, or even in global scale. So I would say, and also because of the sensitivity and also I would say empathy of the end user when designing the product, for example, we are, or me more or less speaking, I'm more imagining for the end user, the customer, what will they think about it, how they will feel, smell or touch, and all the kind of small kind of little reaction towards the design itself would bring it and influence my kind of initial design concept and also the design development process.
Yeah. Do you think that going off script a little bit, I'm just curious about your work, Kristen.
Yeah.
Do you think that has something to do with this idea that from a more female, if we're looking at it from a gender perspective, design approach, is it something that we take on as a whole of life approach to design? Because we're kind of more thinking about not just solving this problem, but how this thing that we've designed is going to go on into the future and its whole life cycle.
Yeah, I probably, I agree on this kind of point. I don't know, maybe it's kind of like the nature how, as a female, we were given this great gift to be able to give birth to baby, which gonna cost on the future, and hence it's kind of, I just imagining maybe how this would kind of bring us to this sensitivity and consideration of future actions. I mean, I'm just imagining, and also down to different personality, obviously, different people, even or female, you and I would respond differently to the same topic. So, but I do feel like as female, kind of small reaction towards a lot of little things kind of really accumulate to kind of bigger thoughts in a later stage, and then this can be like formalized into like an idea, an essay, a product, a design, or even just a voice itself to like be let people to be aware of.
Yeah, I guess if I can respond to that question, gender, though I don't work in design, I work in storytelling and in writing and representing design, communicating about design. So as far as how I think my gender impacts on that work, I really think that my ability to empathize with a brand or a person and be able to communicate their story clearly and faithfully to their voice. I think that requires a level of empathy and kind of those, as we touched on in the original chat, those soft skills that are sort of undervalued in maybe corporate circles or in the hard 9-to-5 kind of grind outside of the creative industry. I think those skills, I see them in my own life as coming from, I'm familiar with them from the women in my life. So if I can I can speak to that, I think that that's how it impacts in my work. Okay, so the next question that we have here is, do you have any personal anecdotes about particularly good moments of being lifted up in your roles? So not necessarily just by other women, could be anyone in your working life. And this person says that they need the inspiration.
Well, I meant like probably Nicole and Sarah would have like more story to tell. But from my perspective, I mean, from my own experience, I'm really, really fortunate in my kind of career role at the moment. So after graduate in the University of Melbourne, excuse me, Melbourne School of Design. So I'm really kind of fortunate to be able to join fabrication workshop in the school and also being a senior tutor role, which it has been like, so in the kind of workshop environment, because of the hard machinery and like CNC, all those wood sorting, and that's kind of transition being more dominated by male staff. I was kind of fortunate to join and still be able to work because of the help of technology to another extent. So, I mean, in the past, because of this more kind of physically demanding work in the fabrication workshop, female kind of having this kind of disadvantage and hence probably like less role in this kind of like industry. But now with the technology, all this hard work has been done by the machine. So if you have a great idea and the cutlery, the sewing, the CNC, the laser cutting, they will do a job for you that it requires like really, really less kind of physical power or kind of other demands on kind of physical differences or even like disadvantage. So now there's kind of more equal, and the university and also a lot of industry and in the environment is actually like really be aware of this current situation and encouraging more female to join kind of more previously more male dominant kind of roles, I would say.
Do you I know, Kristen, that you've mentioned you consider yourself to be quite early in your career, even though you do have a wealth of experience as well that you bring to the table. But I'm curious whether you have yourself had the opportunity yet in your career to kind of support or help someone that is female identifying, maybe access the industry or like give them some advice.
Yeah, I mean, at this current stage of my career, I'm still quite in a really young and early stage. I would probably say a kind of similar experience will be like supporting and inspiring my students, like especially the female students that are first entering this realm. Like from my realm will be architecture and design, and sometimes it's a bit intimidated like how the future for them would be and how the uncertainty, how much support towards female gonna be in this industry, because there's still quite lots of practice, architecture practice in Australia, in Melbourne, in Sydney, and other places, or even globally. The main leadership are still formed by white men, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So
it's okay, we can say it. You can say white men, it's fine.
Yeah. So at this, to be honest, it's a bit disappointing to see this kind of situation. But on the other hand, there's a lot of more emerging practice really taking this role of bringing more female architect, female designer to kind of leadership to support them in terms of their career. And I guess society is improving, and yeah.
Yeah, I think I feel really positively about the way things are progressing. I mean, I think that I would take the conversation that we had the other day as an indication that things are moving forward. For some groups it's slower than others, but certainly earlier in my career, I would never have been able to have a conversation like that. I would have never felt comfortable bringing the fact that I'm a person of color, that I'm a Filipino woman into the conversation, speaking in a media landscape, in a design landscape that is, predominantly still quite a white and privileged world to be in. So I think part of my journey, a way that I've been uplifted and something that impacts on my professional life is something totally outside the design community. So I was approached at the end of 2018 by a collective of Filipina women who all got together to shine a light on Filipino food and culture in Melbourne and beyond, throughout Australia. We had our first Filipino major event at Melbourne Food and Wine, and it sold out. And so, that kind of totally unrelated to the design world, but that experience showed me that actually, the support we got from, Melbourne Food and Wine, as much as the public buying tickets, like it really sort of affirmed to me that it's great to be a visible Filipina person. And I never had it growing up. And, you kind of look at the landscape and you're like, oh, you're growing up and you're like, oh, I wish I could see someone like me, be a designer or be an architect, or, I wish someone in my family maybe had the same experience and I could share these things with them, that I could get a mentor that had a similar experience to me. I never really had that, but I'm buoyed by the fact that maybe this group has shown me that I could be that for others. So yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of hope for the future. I feel positively about it. It's easy to get a bit, caught up in how much work we need to do. But yeah, I feel good. I feel positive. I think we're things are moving in the right direction.
And that's why we have this talk.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right. Because I think if I rewound and I told my 18-year-old self, and I was like coming out of uni, like, one day you're going to be having a conversation that people in the design community or people in the broader cultural community of Melbourne are going to be seeing on a public platform. I probably would have freaked out, because I don't think that I would have thought that something like this could be possible, especially with, someone like yourself joining me in this conversation. So I think, I feel, pretty good. Okay, the next question we have here is, Now, I think this is a pretty similar question to the previous one. How does gender expression show up in your creative or design process? Slightly different, I guess, in terms of, maybe that's a question that's more looking at whether the things you design could be looked at as gendered. I don't know. A little bit overlap with the first question that we kind of had. Yeah. I mean, I can probably expand, although I know that this is probably more a question about the design process, but I have tried consciously in the last couple of years, since becoming more conscious to the platforms that I have available to me, and to the kind of audience that I have access to that not everyone does. I've become more conscious about bringing my whole self to the way that I express myself, and not invalidating my own experience when I turn up to write about a project. So often the fact that I grew up in a very working class background, in a family that migrated from elsewhere, often when I first came into the industry, I thought that was something that I needed to kind of, keep behind and turn up to work with my professional knowledge and my professional hat on, and leave all of my kind of home life at home. But gender and cultural expression equally, I think now, it has to inform the way that I write, and I think it always has. So I'm just more conscious of how it does now. I sort of see where my own personal life intersects with my professional life a lot more when I'm writing. Okay, so we have another question, which is, oh, sorry, unless you wanted to add to that point, Kristen.
I mean, this conversation can go forever.
So many different ways, I know.
Yeah, that's right. But probably one thing to add is, because I'm from an architectural background, where we do take consideration into structure, kind of more engineer side of knowledge or consideration, which is then in the industrial is more male dominant, I have to say. But like, for example, my design piece, the Stew, has bringing a lot of like this side of consideration to make itself self-supportable. Well, it's also quite organic kind of form that I mean, when I'm designing, I'm more kind of conscious about what this material would like to behave and lots of way, and then react and then design with it. So I'm not sure, I mean, to some extent, it's probably more like kind of unconscious when you are approaching this method of design, in terms of like how it respond to gender expression or differences, rather than kind of top-down kind of approach towards a design piece that you want this shape, and then you want to make this material work with your idea. So perhaps an up kind of reaction, observe and reflect, and then act. The kind of like design circle maybe more or less more kind of I don't know, related to gender, perhaps.
I think the other thing to point out too is that just because we are women, and just because we have a certain cultural background, like you and I both have very different cultural backgrounds, I think, and even though we're having this talk, and I think it's a very important discussion to have and be a part of, as creatives, we shouldn't be burdened to, if gender or if cultural expression is not a part of the thing that we're designing, I don't think we should feel like burdened to, sort of wedge it into everything that we do, because, it's we shouldn't be beholden to the things that other people use to define us, really. So we should feel free to express ourselves in any way that we feel, and if that expression includes culture, if that expression includes gender, if there's a purpose for it within the piece or within within the written piece or within the piece that you're designing, then sure, then it's fine. If it's contextual, then fine. But we shouldn't feel like purely because I'm a woman and purely because I have a certain background that I need to constantly be talking about this thing. I don't think that makes much sense to me.
And another I'm thinking is, since we're having this talk about female designer, but my own hope would be in the future, there's no need to bring this into conversation, that men and female in design is all the same. There's no need to really separating, or what happened in man in a career or female's career is all like there's no difference. That's my hope in the future.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's hopefully that we're starting to see those boxes or those walls dissolve. Like we're seeing, I don't know, I wish Sarah was here, because there's a, now I want to talk about fashion and how a lot of fashion is quite genderless now.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm not the expert on that whatsoever, but it's just seeing that in certain industries, and I think fashion is a good example, because it is so immediate, and it has been so harshly gender defined for so long that I think it's a good example of where we are starting to see like collections that are just collections, and if you want to wear it, you want to wear it. If you resonate with a piece, then go for it. Like there's no prescribed way to wear clothing, I think, anymore, which is fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here in my Zoom uniform, which is like, a top that's like appropriate for business things, and then I'm just wearing shorts. So there's really no rules anymore, I think, as well with Zoom. Okay, so next question. Are there any international designers that are particularly focused on sustainable initiatives and design that you can suggest keeping an eye out for? What would you say to that, Kristen?
Like in the international scale, there are so many fantastic designers institute are diving into this pressing sustainable ideas and design and products. But I mean, because we're in this Australia and kind of unique landscape, I would also like to point out there's some really, really great designer in Australia that really focusing on helping the planet make this kind of sustainable initiative. And also there's so many exhibitions, events, partially I've been involved in, and also some of them will gonna be planted for future Melbourne Design Week, for instance. So in the past, I've been drawn for Welcome to Wasteland. So it's a kind of exhibition that gathering the designers to work with waste materials. So among that, there's so many genius ideas. They make use of like waste e-products, and there's one product is using the kitchen waste or more like vegetables to make it into a single-use plate for takeaways. So definitely also watch out the designers in Australia, where I'm as well. There's so many names, probably I won't point it out, but yeah, it's quite easy to being online now.
I think on that point, there's I think really we should all be trying to be sustainable designers. If as far as the conversations that I've had with people in the industry, I think it's almost a shift away from thinking, oh, this person does sustainable design. It's like really, it's an internal kind of auditing process that we kind of all of us, even outside of the design industry, need to go through and look at the way that we do things, and really question what kind of world we're contributing to with the actions that we do in our everyday lives. So it's one thing to kind of look at international designers and people that are like great examples of this, where it works really, really well, and they have the resources at their disposal to be able to produce these like incredible outcomes. But then I would probably say, if you're looking on an international scale, there's a lot of learning that you can do just from traveling and looking at different ways that different communities think about waste and think about production. For example, like it's almost not to kind of be reductive, but it's almost kind of rewinding back to practices that have always been in place in certain areas where infrastructure hasn't been developed maybe to what we're used to here in Australia. There's a lot of things that people kind of make do with solutions. They have, I'm just thinking now of, when I've traveled across Southeast Asia, they have a lot of, instead of plastic containers, they'll weave things out of banana leaves, for example. And that's something that we would, excuse me, call, oh, that's a sustainable practice, but it's like they've been doing that since the dawn of time. So it's not necessarily looking at innovation only. It's also about kind of pausing and kind of looking across the board internationally and seeing what learnings there can be taken from processes that have been in place for generations, sustainable processes.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Okay. Next question. I'm wondering if you've considered deconstructing gender, recognizing that the essences of the masculine and feminine are unrelated to gender within your work. Ooh, gosh, I wish Sarah and Nicole were here, because I feel like they would have a lot to say on that.
I mean,
it's a bit more abstract for me because I'm a writer. So if you want to take this one, Kristen.
I mean, deconstructing gender would be an interesting way to think about all this, like all the design work. As you mentioned, Sandra, like we should be ourselves to define the piece, the work you created, rather than vice versa. So it should never be an idea you created and then deconstructing it and then label it back what is which part. But the kind of itself, when you are doing it, it already defines the piece, where in this sense would be this constructing the ideas yourself or even gender. I mean, again, talking about my design piece, there's quite a lot of elements considered masculine, like the way you curve, the roughness of the material, the shape you kind of formed it. But whereas the curvature, the uncertainty of how this material behave, the tactile, the smell, it kind of brings the feminine elements to the work. So, I mean, this kind of just two kind of levels at the end of the string that you always kind of balance yourself depending on what you are.
I think I'm just conscious of time, so I've got to move on to the next question, but that's fascinating. And my kind of take on it is that, since the next question asks, I'm hoping to know if you still believe that the industry still others marginalized design, and how do we move beyond that? For me, with storytelling, what principles are involved in designing a female future? So I think these questions, they're huge questions. We could go on about them for a very long time and probably, crack open some beers and really nut it out. But for me, I think what we've talked about, what the talk the other day kind of got to, was this idea that, like what you said, Kristen, ideally, we don't need to be sitting here talking about what female design looks like. It's just design. It's an innovation. It's a future that includes and is inclusive of the broad spectrum of identities that people carry within themselves, and we all carry multitudes, within us. So I think I would say, if if we can try to, you know, aim for that future where we don't need to have discussions like this, and, you know, not needing to double down on this binary kind of system where it's like designing a female future because we're conscious that we're coming from a future, a past that is, you know, very dominantly male. If rather than designing a female future, it's more designing an inclusive future. And, you know, and maybe that's the thing, that's the aim. And maybe that's where we should leave it. I think it's 2:30 now. So yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Kristen. Thanks, Janaya. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I'm sorry. Janaya, I'm sorry. Thanks to MPavilion and to Fringe for having us today. Really enjoyed it. And thanks to everyone for your questions. It's been really quite interesting.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.